US and EU sanctions against Russia are important, but the pressure needs to be increased. This was stated by Finland's Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen. She called the decision by Washington and Brussels to impose new restrictions timely. She emphasized that the war is very costly for Russia, and its economy is already collapsing.
We simply have to increase the pressure. Unfortunately, it seems we are not able to change Russia's imperial ambitions, but we must be able to change their calculations. War costs a lot of money, and we are already seeing that Russia's real economy truly cannot withstand this burden. Elina Valtonen, Finland's Minister for Foreign Affairs, in an interview with Bloomberg.
Alexander Levchenko, diplomat, former ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary of Ukraine to the Republic of Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. He is now joining us live. Hello, Alexander.
Greetings to you and the viewers.
Alexander Mikhailovich, likewise, welcome. The head of Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Sybiga, stated that a new stage of pressure on Russia has begun. These are the US sanctions. Well, as we can see for now, this is just a middle ground option. There may be further tightening at some point from the US side, but one thing worries me. How much time will it take for us to understand their effect, and will anything be done during this period? The United States did not indicate that following such a response to skepticism regarding Putin's opinion that the sanctions are not working. Trump replied, "We'll see in 6 months. Ask me about it then." Does this mean that during these 6 months, nothing more will be done by the US?
Well, it depends on how Russia will respond. The sanctions were imposed to get Putin to the negotiating table. They put forward Zakharova, the press secretary of the foreign ministry, who said, yes, we have immunity from all sanctions, from the European ones. And the Europeans have introduced a very powerful 19th package of sanctions. Now, finally, the new administration has introduced a new package of sanctions. Lukoil, and most importantly against Rosneft. Let me remind you, Rosneft is Putin's personal wallet. And when Rosneft starts losing money, the dictator loses out. This is personal money, and right away, instantly, Dmitriev flew to New York for negotiations. They have immunity, but when it turned out that there are things that are very serious, things that can't just be covered up with propaganda cliches, well, that's different. Dmitriev arrived and started talking about how they want peace. And it turns out the only thing standing in their way is Ukraine. This is despite the fact that Ukraine agreed in the 5th minute of negotiations with Trump that it is necessary to reach an agreement first, a ceasefire first, and then a peace treaty. That's it. That was in February, a month ago. Since February, we've been waiting for Russia's decision. Dmitriev came and started telling CNN that he was very glad that Ukraine had changed its position, that finally Ukraine also wants peace. Well, it's a circus, that's all. So the sanctions are having a very serious effect, and if Putin still refuses to seriously negotiate for peace, naturally they will be strengthened. And the virtual tomahawks that have been promised to Ukraine could become real. And here, one should consider whether Moscow really needs that. Back to the studio.
Well, regarding Dmitriev's visit and his statements, of course, we saw those subtle hints that these sanctions, not only will they have no effect, but also in principle. Trump is acting like Biden. This whole Biden topic, how politically influential is it from the Russian Federation side, this use of the theme, don't be like Biden, let's keep negotiating. Although, in reality, these are just empty talks, just stalling for time. But nevertheless, in your view, how significant is it and how much influence does it have? Is this a hook for Trump to keep having these pointless conversations with the Kremlin side? Let's leave it at that for now. As for personal contacts, Trump says no, not until there are some real moves, some actual progress.
Yes. Well, Trump constantly criticizes Biden, so that's the hook. He passes the blame, saying that Biden is the one who ruined US relations with Russia. We are counting on Trump for good relations. But look, the US president may want good relations with you, but as long as this war needs to end, there can't be good relations between the US and Russia while Russia continues its war against Ukraine. This is the biggest question since World War II. That just doesn't happen. It's time to finally wake up from these illusions. That's why Dmitriev told all this to Vitkov, and Vitkov will then pass everything on. Then, further down the chain, either to the vice president or now to the US president, who is currently in the Far East, in fact, in East Asia, where the ASEAN summit is taking place, followed by the Indo-Pacific summit, meaning first in Malaysia, then in South Korea. Then that's why it will probably be Rubio who will report this, who his secretary, who is also the president's national security advisor, and probably Milwensu, the vice president. And then they will decide what to report directly to the US president and how to respond to what Dmitriev has said, who is supposedly authorized to voice what Putin thinks. So I think there will be a reaction soon, probably on Monday, and we'll find out whether they manage to convince official Washington that Moscow wants peace and that everyone is getting in the way. Europe and Ukraine are preventing them from achieving this. Well, now they're going to take this seriously. Well, go ahead then. Back to the studio.
So it turns out that Rubio is also getting in the way, right? So Dmitriev kind of hinted, let's bring back Vitkov, with whom things went pretty well. They held negotiations, and he would listen attentively to Putin for at least 5 hours. But who do you think Trump is listening to more right now, since he has now set conditions under which he might meet with Putin? According to the head of the White House, first, Putin must show a real willingness to end the war against Ukraine. Until then, Trump considers any negotiations with the dictator of the Russian Federation to be pointless. Let's listen.
I need to make sure that we make a deal. I'm not going to waste my time. I've always had a great relationship with Putin, but this has been a big disappointment. I thought this would be resolved long before peace was established in the Middle East.
Well, after the phone conversations between Rubio and Lavrov, it became clear that there are no shifts or any changes in the intentions of the Russian Federation. That is, not to end the war, not to stop the fighting. There aren't any. So, as you can see, how realistic is it that Vitkov will return to the sentencing process and that Ruby will be replaced again? Well, as you see it, who will be the next, let's say, link between the Kremlin and Washington?
Well, for a bad dancer, Dmitriev is hindered by Rubio. So, all right, to you. His secretary is in the way, and at the same time, he is already the national security advisor. These are the highest ranks responsible for security policy and international relations in the US. There are no positions higher than these, and right now, they are concentrated in Rubio's hands. Yes, Vitkov indeed does, in general, really have Trump's trust. But Vitkov doesn't know many things regarding how negotiations are conducted to achieve peace, what things need to be used, what should be taken into account. Well, it seems to me that right now he is a special representative by rank, which is, of course, a whole level below the Secretary of State, so Rubio's opinions are definitely decisive in this regard. And there are reports in the press that the reason Trump decided to impose sanctions on Russia was precisely because Rubio convinced him, since Rubio is a more experienced politician and understands where all these pointless negotiations are leading. So, let's see how events unfold from here. The sanctions will start taking effect soon. We can see that India is already almost completely refusing Russian oil. There are serious signals, and even Trump mentioned this at the Northeast Asian Leaders Conference, that China as well will join in on this. This means that Russia will be in a huge deficit with nothing left to finance the war. With nothing to finance the war, they'll quickly rush to the negotiating table and try to make a deal. Obviously, that's the scenario we're likely to see. Will it take 6 months? I think not even 6 months, maybe even just half a month. The main thing is for the US to stick to the course they've chosen. It's the more realistic one. We've been warning from the very first day of negotiations that Russia would lie. That's exactly what happened with our president. So Trump has a clearer understanding of who he's dealing with. So it's obvious that until Putin seriously sits down at the negotiating table and, to begin with, announces the possibility of a ceasefire, there won't be any progress. At least we hope there won't be any movement from the United States. In other words, no one is going to give another 2 weeks anymore. Washington itself understands that it has given too many chances, and this only produces the opposite effect, studio.
And just so there are no doubts about this in the Kremlin, they're even preparing the next steps. The administration of US President Donald Trump has prepared new sanctions that will be applied to key sectors of the Russian economy if the Kremlin continues to delay ending the war against Ukraine. Reuters reports this, citing sources in the White House. American officials have told their European counterparts that they support the EU's use of frozen Russian assets to purchase weapons for Ukraine, and Washington has already held preliminary internal discussions about using Russian funds located in the US. Additionally, further sanctions may be directed against Russia's banking sector and infrastructure, and those used for supplying oil to the market. To what extent, in principle, does the Kremlin consider, hear, and see the actions the US is now preparing in case Putin refuses to sit down? You always put it this way, Alexander Mikhailovich, about sitting down at the negotiating table. But that too might be pointless. We've already seen how all of this played out in Turkey, how it happened in Istanbul. There were even history teachers coming, and everyone, basically, but in the end, thank God, at least it ended with the exchange of prisoners and the repatriation of bodies, including the return of remains. That was the only real benefit from those meetings. As you can see, for this to sound like a ceasefire, that's what Trump wants, that's what Ukraine wants. What could the Russian Federation try to slip in instead, seeing as Dmitriev brought 3 plans, each with a long trail of subtext, even though there are only 3 points? But nevertheless, what could the Russian Federation propose in order to achieve a ceasefire? And again, a whole bunch of conditions, A, B, and C, could be attached. But at least on the surface, it looks like we're moving toward a ceasefire. How do you assess the likelihood that the US could be deceived by this again?
Regarding sanctions, I would put it this way, using Moscow's own words. Well, the US hasn't even started imposing them yet. Just wait. Next, regarding the things they will try to manipulate. Well, they've been manipulating for a long time, but they finally manipulated themselves into a corner. So Putin has played himself with his own arrogance. This decision concerns sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft. Next, a new package is already being prepared, and these packages will continue to expand and be adopted. Why? Because Trump wants to end the war through peaceful means, and sanctions are a non-military way to pressure Russia to come to the negotiating table and agree to peace. It's not a military method, right? But considering if it continues to behave like Medvedev, they start making threats and so on, then other things might come into play in the discussion, either as an argument or, as Donald Trump says, as a trump card of some sort. Apart from tomahawks, the United States actually possesses a wide variety of other advanced and powerful military trump cards and strategic assets. So it is extremely important for Russia to fully understand and recognize this fact very well. The main point here is that the proposal which has been discussed and considered is already on the table, so to speak. More than half a year of maneuvering has led nowhere. I don't think anyone is going to fall for yet another round of discussions, just another trip around the ring road and ending up right back where we started. And Trump said very clearly in an interview, it won't happen. There will be no concrete agreements reached by our negotiating teams. And there's absolutely no point in meeting with Putin. This is a completely reasonable position. So the Kremlin can essentially tell its citizens whatever it wants, that if necessary, they will continue going under sanctions, keep on fighting, and so on, because, as they claim, everyone is against them. But in the end, the coordinated policy approach that we now currently see between Europe and the United States regarding achieving security in all, not just for Ukraine, for the country, it should yield its results. And I don't think this time they'll be able to deceive Washington. Well, maybe it worked once, twice, but a third time it definitely won't. Back to the studio. And
Alexander Mikhailovich, finally, I'd like to ask, do you understand what the root causes of the conflict are for the Russian Federation? They always try to cover it up with some completely absurd reasons, like protecting national interests or supposed threats from Ukraine, a non-nuclear state. How could there have been any threats to the Russian Federation, the largest nuclear power, from Ukraine? It's laughable, Ukraine's neutrality. Excuse me, but when Russia attacked in 2014, Ukraine was neutral. It had neutral status. It wasn't about NATO expansion. Now, hold on. NATO is a defensive alliance. It doesn't attack anyone. And especially according to its constitution, it doesn't claim any territories. They don't lay claim to any. All this absurdity. How much do people in the US understand and see that these are all, in fact, bogus proposals from the Russian Federation? Their only goal is to keep waging war and destroy the Ukrainian state. How do you see it? Do they understand the real goals over there?
Yes, everyone sees it, everyone understands. There were some illusions about playing some kind of game, trying to maneuver, to drive a wedge between Russia and China. Now it's become clear that the strategy needs to shift a bit. Now, the focus should be more on China. The upcoming meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping is very important in this regard. So, some things will start to fall into place logically. Now, this logical sequence is such that an attack on Crimea would pose a danger to all of Europe. This has been demonstrated, so to speak, by the drone war against Poland, Denmark, Germany, and so on. And you know what? The head of the FSB, at the conference in Samarkand, the head of the intelligence services of the CIS countries stated that Europe itself sent drones against itself, which
is a familiar rhetoric. Ukraine is attacking itself with drones?
And not Russia, and so on. But remember, in the first days of the war, we were supposedly shelling ourselves.
Shelling ourselves, actually by ourselves.
Shelling ourselves.
It was all provocations.